Hello, welcome back to Psych with Michelle. I am so happy you're here. So today I'll be talking about saying the hard things, and I would like to state that this topic is inspired by an article that I read titled How to Say the Unsayable, which I will link below. So before we get started, I want you all to pause for a second and think of the most outlandish, out-of-pocket belief you may hold, or even maybe an objection to a current belief, right? And I'll give you all a second or two to think of that. Okay, so once you have it in your brain, I want you to now say this thought out loud. If you said this thought out loud, first of all, congratulations. You probably don't need to watch this video. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye. But if there was even a slight sliver of hesitation in saying it, or your heart dropped for a second, or you actually weren't even able to say it at all, I want to say that that is absolutely normal. And in this video, we'll be exploring how to say the hard things. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, you know I have to provide you with a little bit of background on what's happening in our brains that makes it hard to say the hard things. So as a species, we have evolved to be very sensitive to the possibility of being kicked out of our group, right? Essentially facing ostracism. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, our limbic system, which really is responsible for processing emotion and all these different things, is at play whenever we are trying to riddle with saying the hard thing. Now, our limbic system, which involves our amygdala, our hippocampus, hypothalamus, thalamus, and some other, brain parts, essentially works to kind of filter through how to minimize the possibility of facing rejection. Now, as I've stated in a previous video, which feel free to check out, it's about setting rejection goals. But as I've stated in a previous video, whenever we are faced with the possibility of ostracism, this really puts us in a very turbulent place. And from an evolutionary perspective, the reason that this happens is because our ancestors had to evolve to essentially make sure that they weren't left out to fend for themselves. As humans, we survive better in groups, right? So the last thing you want to do is be facing the elements, which weather, right? Alone, facing predators alone, big bear, I don't know, whatever, alone, and actually also other tribes alone. So being able to stick together in a group served us well and still continues to serve us well. Now, if we think about it though, in our current modern society, being ostracized does not carry maybe the same exact detrimental effects. However, if we're still being completely honest, being canceled or kicked out of your friend group or kicked out of your family, whatever the case may be, is still a very serious threat. And this often can actually have some very negative consequences on us, right? And maybe a really challenging one being having to then think about the possibility of wanting to end your life because of what has happened. Now, the reason that ostracism triggers such an intense response within us is because it targets at least 4 psychological domains, right? It targets our sense of belonging, our self-esteem, our feelings of control, and our ability to form meaning, right? So I'm gonna maybe take us back to high school. If any high schoolers are watching this, maybe you can really relate to what I'm talking about, so I hope this is not too triggering. But if you think about it, if you were a high schooler and you had some friends and I guess all your friends believe that you should wear pink on Wednesdays always, and you were like, this is stupid, I don't want to do this anymore. Even though that might have been a very serious core belief that you had, being able to realize that you probably would get kicked out of the group if you opposed it was a very serious threat. And we can see how it targets those same exact 4 domains. So if you're kicked out of this high school friend group, then you no longer belong to something. You don't have control over your social life anymore. Your self-esteem is triggered because obviously you've been, essentially told that you're not like good enough, not qualified enough, whatever the case may be for the group. And then your meaning is also affected because how we also understand ourselves often is in relation to others, right? So now you can't really create meaning in that domain anymore socially for yourself. And so this really has an adverse effect on us. Now, I do want to note though that there are some people, and I'm sure maybe you all might see these folks out and about every now and then, who are not afraid of ostracism. But before you and I go and become envious of these individuals and try to be like them, it's important to note that actually studies show that people who are on the like absolute opposite end of fearing ostracism actually oftentimes qualify for a diagnosis for antisocial personality disorder. And neuroscience tells us that, or actually shows us that for some of these individuals, their limbic systems don't work in the same way that maybe the average normal person who is afraid of ostracism, how their limbic systems work. So if we can put that to the side, then how do then the people who do have normal limbic systems, right? How do they then say the challenging things, the difficult things, right? The answer to this is moral courage. I'm gonna let that simmer. Moral courage, yeah. So moral courage is the ability to act in accordance with your own convictions despite the fear of retaliation or punishment. Now, some people might naturally be good at this, but a lot of times we have to work and build this skill, right? It's not something that's fixed. It's something that we can definitely grow and strengthen. Now, the 4 ways that you can do this are, 1, by actually really grounding the fear that you have of what will happen when you say the hard thing, right? A lot of times as humans, when we're really worried about something, it orbits in this like fantasy land where it's like not like really grounded. So if you if you think about, and I'm sorry I'm throwing all the teenagers and adolescents under the bus, but if you think about an adolescent or a teenager who's like, I can't go to school because I like have a pimple on my face and like no one's gonna want to talk to me and like everyone's gonna hate me. If there's an adult in the room who's emotionally intelligent and sane enough to understand what's happening, they can see that this kid has now taken something that probably wouldn't cause such a big reaction and now made it this lofty thing. So ways that we can maybe ground the kid and in this situation would be, okay, well, let's pause for a second. What do we actually think might happen, right? Let's go through the steps bit by bit. So in the same way you would do something like that is the same way that you also can ask yourself these questions of what will happen when you say the hard thing. Now, this can look like saying, okay, well, what is it that I actually want to say? And what do I expect to happen? So once you've done that, you then want to focus on not going in hot. Now, a good example for this, right, that can maybe help us really understand this concept is, let's say, for instance, you have a cousin who recently got a boyfriend and you don't like him. You don't like how maybe he treats her, or he's just like, problematic guy, etc., whatever, right? Now, you don't want to wait until he's at the dinner table with you all for Thanksgiving, you're 3 glasses of wine in, and he's on a rant about something you disagree with, to throw your fist down and say, like, I think you're a bad guy, turn to your cousin and say, you should leave him. Sorry, I only laugh because it might make for good Thanksgiving drama, but over the long haul, it's not going to serve you. It's not going to serve the message, or it's not going to enact the action that you're hoping, right? Instead, it might build resistance. So then within saying the hard thing, you want to make sure that you've calmed your nervous system down before you have to deliver the hard thing, right? Because oftentimes it usually involves disagreeing with, something within the group norm, or disagreeing with someone else. But again, like, this can bring up really big emotions for us, right? And if you've been sitting and bottling it for a very long time, it can also build resentment. So the last thing you want to do is to just kind of explode, right? So something that can be helpful might be asking yourself, like, when is the best time to deliver this when I'm least, emotionally activated, right? And then another question that you can ask yourself, is how can I set a tempo and make sure that the other person is somewhat attuned to the conversation that we're going to be having, right? Now, the third point for kind of building this moral courage and being able to speak out and say the challenging thing is practice. The last thing you want is for you to be delivering this very challenging thing for the first time. You want it to be about the 10th, maybe 15th time in which you've said this out loud to yourself. And again, I think this actually ties in nicely with the point that I made before, right? Because by the time that you flushed it out for the 10th time, you feel pretty comfortable with the message, you are familiar with it, and you're honestly honed in on what you really want to communicate, right? And I think at this point too, you can kind of slice down maybe some of the unnecessary things that you don't need to include when you're saying the hard thing. Now, the final point, the fourth one to just building this moral courage to be able to say the challenging things, is tell the truth in slant and in love, right? And really quickly, I want to say all these things are listed in the article as well too. But tell the truth in slant and with love, right? And so in slant, meaning that you maybe disguise it a little bit, right? And let's say, for instance, you want to say something that's really challenging. Maybe you find someone who's already said what you want to say, and then you like show this to someone. Maybe it's a quote, whatever it is, and you go, I kind of see the truth in what they're saying a little bit, right? Now, this might oppose the group, but ultimately, like, because of how you've introduced it, it's very subtle. It comes in really nicely. Another thing is also making sure that you're not saying the hard thing from a place of like intense like anger or like hatred, right? Because no matter what the message is, people will feel that energy and it won't land well. So when you encase it in love, right, I think in some ways it calls for you to be even more intentional with what you have to say. And it allows it to be delivered from a place of sincerity as well too. Now, maybe what you're saying still is something that is against the norm or whatnot. But nonetheless, people will still recognize that like your approach to it all was from a place of concern and actual good intentions, right? So that essentially kind of concludes the 4 different steps to building moral courage and thus being able to say the challenging things. If you found this helpful, if you feel like you might be able to implement some of these things, be sure to comment below, start a conversation with some of the other folks in the comments, and maybe brainstorm some ways that you might be able to say something that is challenging. I am so glad you're here. I am so glad you're able to tune in, and hopefully this serves you. And I'll see you next time. Bye.